I want to welcome all of you to tonight's Political Happy Hour. This is, I believe, the 7th in a series that we have been more than happy to sponsor along with the Boston Globe. We look forward to a spirited discussion with Josh Miller and Congressman Lynch. It's particularly pleasing to all of us at Suffolk to have Congressman Lynch here tonight. He is no stranger to Suffolk University. In fact, he succeeded in Congress the former legendary Joe Moakley, who had such very close relationships with this university. Since going to Congress, one thing I can personally say, because Congressman Lynch is a friend of mine, is that he never, ever forgets where he came from or the people who live in his district. He is constantly and relentlessly fighting for their interests. He also becomes a champion, once he goes to Congress, of issues that are important to us here at Suffolk University, of veterans' rights, and of course of education at all levels. He has been a leader in the strategy development for financing of anti-terrorist strategy. He's someone that has made the city of Boston and his entire district very, very proud of him. It is my pleasure now to give to you the Boston Globe's Joshua Miller and Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Vernon. Thanks for those kind words. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here at this live political happy hour at Suffolk University. We're so happy you're here. We're so happy everyone who's joining us online at bostonglobe.com, and we hope you'll sign up for the newsletter from which this event takes its name, Political Happy Hour, at bostonglobe.com/political happy hour. But most of all, I hope everyone will give another warm round of applause for Boston's own Congressman, Stephen Lynch.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So you're a Southie guy. It's winter. What do you use to save your parking spot on G Street?
Well, this winter, fortunately, nothing yet. We're always ready. I think I've got a couple of those cones. I have a cone with the congressional seal on the front of it that I pop out there. But unfortunately, it's very popular with my neighbors, so somebody keeps swiping them as I put them out. We have a couple of old lounge chairs that I can use in emergency, but that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last winter, was it difficult commuting back and forth in the mid?
Actually, it was great because I got a spot in late December with the first snow, and I had that till March. So because the mayor kept extending the time at which he would, end putting the space savers out there. So we love the mayor, and he actually at one point made all the streets one way, which was a great success. So, he earned high marks from the neighborhood of South Boston, the way he handled the snow emergency last year.
When did you stop hearing from your constituents about the snow?
When it went away. So. We're actually trying some strategies to build some satellite parking in some old industrial sites, including the old Boston Edison plant down by First Street. We're actually trying to squeeze 100 or so spots in an area that they're not using. So we're trying different strategies. Obviously, you want to get people out of cars and have them use rapid transit. So transit-oriented development down by Andrew Square and by Broadway Station. So hopefully some of that. The younger people seem to be more inclined to use the bus and rapid transit, especially the train. If they can walk to the train station, most of them will give up their cars. But
if it works, if it's running.
Yeah. But it's a challenge changing people's behavior. So. It's a day at a time, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see how it is this winter. I want to turn to something a bit more somber. I don't think everyone here knows when you effectively won your race for Congress to succeed the late Joe Moakley. What was the primary day of your congressional race?
I was actually elected in the primary on September 11th, the day of the attacks.
In 2001?
So, in 2001, right. So I remember with some of the people in this room, election day is the most orchestrated day of your life. Your campaign team has you minute by minute, literally, where you're going to be. So our strategy was to go out and disrupt my opponent's get out the vote. So we went to Milton, thinking that all of Senator Brian Joyce was a candidate from Milton. So we thought, if I go out and stand out at some of his polling places, he'll bring all his people into Milton to sort of counteract my presence there. And that was our strategy, and it worked to a certain extent. Then we were on our way to Needham to do the same in Cheryl Jake's area, and a quick newscast came on the radio. It said a small passenger plane had struck the World Trade Center, and didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. But then when we got to Needham, there was a canteen truck outside the polling place with a small TV set about this big, and we were all looking, because the sun was coming down, and then we saw the airliner hit the South Tower, and at that point we basically just rolled up the campaign, and eventually the phones went down, and that very orchestrated day became something very, very different. The election itself, even though I was the candidate, was really secondary compared to what we as a nation went through on that day. We had no celebration. We instead, turned it sort of into a memorial for the victims of that day. So many of whom had great and strong connections to the Boston area.
One of the issues that you've been most outspoken on is national security, and I'm wondering how much that focus has to do with what happened on the day you were elected, and it sort of being the event that began your career in Congress effectively.
Yeah, some of it has to do with that. I remember, look, I had not spent a lot of time in Washington prior to my election. And I remember going to Washington. They delayed my swearing in because in the aftermath of the attacks on September 11th, we had anthrax attacks in a bunch of the buildings. So I was supposed to get sworn in, but the Longworth building was attacked. I think Rayburn, somebody was mailing anthrax to the building. So they shut it down and they delayed my swearing in. And when I finally got there, I got to Washington, they had all these tank barriers up all over the place and no-go zones. They actually had an anti-aircraft placement outside on Maryland Street, outside Mike Capuano's apartment. And so there were no realtors. I was trying to get an apartment. There were no realtors. So I ended up spending my first 8 weeks in Washington on Mr. Capuano's aerobed in his living room. I just told him I need a couple of days just so I can get an apartment. So week after week is going by, and I'm living on his aerobed in his living room. And we became, we really bonded to the point where when I finally was able to get an apartment, I saw him on the floor of the house, and I said, "Here's your keys." And he looked at me like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm moving out." And I swear he had some of this empty nester syndrome with me moving out. Like, what do you mean you're moving out? So, but so that has caused us to be very, very close, Mike and I, and we share the representation. Yeah, we share the representation of the city of Boston. So, it's all to the good.
You're one of the few members of Congress who isn't running for president who still speaks about 9/11, and that's in the context of trying to get these 28 pages of a congressional report declassified. Give me a quick background on what you're trying to do and why that's an issue you keep hammering the drum on.
Sure. Well, everybody knows about the 9/11 papers. There's a book, a published book out. So the basis of that book on the 9/11 investigation was an investigation conducted by members of Congress and non-members and government agencies about the details of events leading up to the attacks, and very, very thorough. So right at the end of the investigation, the report was handed over to the White House for publication. And at that point, George W. Bush extricated 28 pages, not redacting sentences or names, things like that, basically pulling out a whole chapter. The chapter dealt with the individuals and entities that were responsible for financing these 19 hijackers in the years and months prior to the attacks. and very explicit, names, entities as well.
You've read it.
Oh yeah. So as a member of Congress, if you have security clearance, you're allowed to go to this secret location in the basement of the Capitol. Basically, they've moved it since, so I'm not giving away a location. And in the presence of Intelligence Committee staff or CIA, you can read it. It's 28 pages, so it doesn't take a whole lot of time. So I went, I asked if I could read it, and with a couple of people watching me, which is weird, I read the 28 pages. You're not allowed to bring in your BlackBerry, or at that time BlackBerry, or any recording devices. You're not allowed to take notes. You can just read it. And so at the end of reading the 28 pages, I read it, probably 3 or 4 times just to be sure I had it. I explained to both of the observers. I said, I'm gonna try to have this declassified. I just want to be honest with you that I think this is important. So after that, I went to Congressman Walter Jones from North Carolina, a Republican, and he had read it as well.
But a very libertarian Republican.
Yeah. A common sense Republican, to be honest with you. Just I think he's a Republican, but also I think very fair-minded and not ideological in even the most remote sense. So he and we sort of had this revelation that, hey, we ought to champion this. Let's see if we can get some other members to read this, because it is a cumbersome process. You have to have the clearance, you have to have permission, you have to go down there, you have to take time out of your day, and it's an awkward process to go through. So they almost build this little barrier. So with all the other things you got going on, do you really want to go down and read a report that they've classified and you can't share with anybody? You can't even talk to anybody. But we both knew we had read the report, and we said, let's try to get some members. So we've got maybe 20 or so members that have agreed to join a request to the president to have him declassify this. And
there are a lot of families of 9/11.
Oh yeah, there are 9/11 families that have joined with us. Some from this area, many from across the country, who have joined us to request that these 28 pages be made public. Now, I understand that in the aftermath of 9/11, you think back to that moment. I understand that in the short term, in the near term, right after the event, there may have been the danger of a visceral response if the facts were and the names and the details all laid out there. But it's been a long time since 9/11, 2001. And I certainly think that the American people could digest the information there. I think the press would do a good job in vetting the details and digging even deeper than that investigation went. And I think it's good. It's the right thing to do. Transparency is a positive in this case, as it is in most cases. I think it's fair and just for the victims' families to get closure on this. I know they also have litigation ongoing with some of the entities that they feel were responsible for the attacks that day. I think it would also be good to inform our national security policy going forward, that to demonstrate to members of Congress and others in our government that this happened. This is how this went down, and I think it would cause us to be more judicious, more thorough, more thoughtful, and more vigilant in our own defense.
The New Yorker paraphrases you as saying, "It's stunning in its clarity and it offers direct evidence of complicity on the part of certain Saudi individuals and entities in Al-Qaeda's attack on America." Can you say, without violating any classified rules, can you say anything more about it?
I don't want to lose my I've got top secret clearance, so if I go too far, I'm afraid there's somebody out there that'll say, we need to.
Why do you think the Obama administration hasn't declassified it?
Well, therefore, this is a follow-on to what the Bush administration had done. And I think there are all kinds of relationships. There are, political relationships. It's a paradox, but our national security apparatus, our intelligence services, work very closely with the Saudi intelligence services. And they share information, and I'm sure that the Saudis are a valuable ally in some respects with in the context of today's Middle East and our national security posture. So there's that relationship, and they don't want to burn that bridge. Then there's the oil issue, energy issue. There's the business relationships. There's the U.S. Oil industry, the Saudi oil industry, the shipping industries. So there are these connections at various levels, and I think that they have us in a position where they are able to stifle that information from becoming public. I just think that's wrong, and I think if we're going to have a healthy and open and honest relationship with any nation, we need to put that stuff out there, and we need to vet it. We need to flesh it all out there. We need to resolve it, and if there's an underlying basis for our alliance, then it will survive. But we need to be open and honest, and I think our first responsibility is to protect the American people, and I don't think keeping the secret is in anywhere consistent with that obligation.
I want to ask you about all your travels overseas. How many congressional delegations overseas have you been on about since 2001?
A lot, a lot. I don't know.
More than
my
2,000?
staff tells me, between Iraq and Afghanistan, there's probably close to 40, just those two countries. And then, if you add in everything else, Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Israel quite a bit, obviously an ally, it's probably double that.
You're probably better traveled than just about anyone else in your district except Secretary of State John Kerry. And I'm curious on how you would define the Kerry doctrine.
Wow. He has, I think that the work that Secretary Kerry has done and his effort, and it's a tough neighborhood that he works in, especially with respect to the Middle East, and put Russia aside for now, but that is a treacherous environment, and he has been nothing short of relentless in his efforts to try to wring out an advantage to this country in his efforts, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in the competing interests of Saudi Arabia versus Iran in that region, the Sunni-Shia dynamic, the Taliban, Afghan government. So it's a target-rich environment there in terms of you pick your critical relationships. So he's been trying to do it all, and I think the Iranian agreement was his finest hour in terms of getting us to an agreement. Now, making that agreement work remains a challenge. It remains difficult for me to get into Tehran, and so you would remember the key to the joint agreement there with Iran is really to make sure that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and their agents, and I've sat with one of their prime investigators, is to actually get on the ground and look at Natanz, look at Arak, which is the heavy water facility, or it was going to be, look at Fordo. We've been guessing all along what the level of development is on the part of the Iranians with respect to a nuclear weapon. This agreement, the great advantage to us is being able to put people on the ground who will tell us exactly what the level of preparedness is there with the Iranians and what our countermeasures need to be. That's the big advantage here, as well as making them, give away and export to Russia 90% of their semi-enriched uranium, basically disassembling the heavy water facility at Adak.
Do you think that is, just to circle back to the question, do you think, you said he's trying to do it all, do you think that's the Kerry doctrine?
Yeah. I think he was waiting for that position. You know, if there was ever anyone who really went to school and used every moment to prepare himself for a position, John Kerry did that. He actually loves that stuff. You could just, if you're in a meeting with him, he just eats, drinks, and sleeps foreign policy, and I think that is the element in which I see him most comfortable. You know, let me leave it at that. You know, he has a certain awkwardness about him in some other context.
Like what?
You know, he's not a song and dance man. You know, the St. Patrick's Day breakfast, probably not his shining moment. You know, he's tried awkward jokes in the past, and they've become national scandals. You know, so. But in that, again in that foreign policy, God bless him. We had a breakfast. He had a breakfast for us over at the State Department. Invited all the members of the Massachusetts delegation, and we got to sort of just huddle up for a little bit and talk about some of these issues. And you know, I told him, I said, John, you know, this whole negotiation around the Iranian agreement is probably your finest hour.
I want to talk about one of the big national security issues we face, and that's the Islamic State, or ISIS. Do you think it's a group we can defeat? And do you think Secretary Kerry and President Obama have laid out a strategy for that goal?
I do think that they can be defeated. Yeah, it's going to require internal pressure within the Muslim community, as well as killing the bad guys. So you've got to operate at different levels there. I think that President Obama and John Kerry have articulated a cause in terms of why we need to disassemble and destroy ISIL, why it's to the advantage of the free world to do so. I am not sure they've articulated a plan to do so. So
does that concern you?
Oh yeah, because that's where we come in. If we're asked to authorize the use of military force, which would be the normal procedure, our military deserves more than just a cause. They deserve a plan that will succeed. And the crux of the problem in Iraq and Syria, where ISIL has gained control, is that when you look at the landscape of that region, and I've sat with maybe a half dozen of the major militant groups, the anti-Assad groups, and obviously not necessarily the Sunni groups. I haven't met with al-Nusra or any of those, but the so-called Free Syrian Army, the people who we would, in our heart of heart, hope that would promote some measure of democracy. Sure. and freedom for the people in that region. When you look at those groups, though, there's probably over 100 that have, you know, over 800 fighters or 1,000 fighters. Some of them have much more than that. When you look at the landscape there, though, if we take out, you know, if you do power rankings like you see in the, you know, before the football on Sunday, they'll do the most powerful teams up top and then right down the line. So at the top right now, we probably see ISIL, one of the most effective fighting forces. Then you have, I think, probably the Syrian government forces. They've got a couple of different levels there. Al-Nusra Front. And as you go down the line, you probably go down to like number 60 in groups before you get to any of these so-called Free Syrian Army folks. So our challenge there is not just to knock off number one. In order to get our guys to a power ranking that would allow them to actually begin to implement some of the things we'd like to see, you got to take out the top 50 groups. That is a 20-year battle. That is a long war. So,
given what you said, it sounds like you would need more than just a cause. You'd need a strategy. Are you disappointed in the president and Secretary Kerry that, as you said, they haven't laid out a strategy?
well, I've just articulated a pretty tough problem. So, I think it would be pretty shallow of me just to criticize. I haven't come up with a proposal. And even the idea, the rough idea that I do agree upon would have to involve some type of caretaker government, and you would need some type of coalition with a lot of input from the Arab countries in the region. We've already got some people who would buy in. I think the Kurds would buy in northern Iraq. I think that Jordan, King Abdullah has been terrific on that. I think he'd be an active participant. I think maybe Erdogan in Turkey would play. Al-Sisi in Egypt, probably, but I don't think we have that critical mass that would. And we also we need Germany, we need France. They've got such long histories in the region. But if we were going to take out Assad, either compelling him to or by agreement, we would have to have some other group in there to be a caretaker government until the institutions could be built up where the Syrian people could actually govern themselves with some assurance that human rights will be protected. So that's that, and that's a
20-year problem, you think?
Yeah, it is.
You voted to authorize military force against Iraq in 2002, but you've said you don't support the use of ground troops against the Islamic State. Wondering if you can sort of explain the distinction in your willingness to authorize force and put the lives of fighting men and women on the line.
Sure. I think in the instance of Saddam Hussein, back when I voted for the authorization of use of force in Iraq, I'm not supposed to take anybody's inventory in the club I belong to, but with respect to Saddam Hussein, okay, so he had used chemical weapons against the Kurds in northern Iraq and killed a lot of innocent women and children, mass graves. He had fought a 10-year war with Iran, 1 million lives. He had obviously invaded Kuwait. He had fired Scud missiles into the civilian population centers in Israel. So he had this pattern and practice of acting outside his borders in a very aggressive manner. So
ISIS
he
doesn't.
had to be taken out. Okay, so I think now it was under false pretenses, though. They said he had weapons of mass destruction, which were false. If I knew he didn't have weapons of mass destruction, I never would have voted for that. But after talking,
Do you regret it?
What's that?
Do you regret your vote on Iraq?
At the time, yeah. I think eventually I would have had a vote to take him out at some point, but as Ted Kennedy said, there's time. There's time. We have time. And you shouldn't put your sons and daughters on the battlefield until you have exhausted every level of diplomacy available. And I did not do that. We did not do that. There was still room because Saddam did not have in hand weapons of mass destruction. And so that was the mistake. That was my mistake. I regret it. But I took every step. When you're confronted with that, obviously, my strategy is always to get as much information from as many sources as you can. So sure, I went to the White House. I sat with Condoleezza Rice. I sat with Tenet, CIA director. Got their briefings. But there is a tendency for people at the White House to sing off the same sheet of music. So then I went to the Israelis to see what information they had, and then I sat with the Clinton administration, who had their inspectors on the ground last, and all of the intelligence from all those different groups, Republican, Democrat, previous administration, were saying, yeah, he's got the weapons. We need to take action. You need to authorize the president in case something happens. So I took all those steps. Unfortunately, all that information was bad. The statement that Colin Powell made at the UN, before the UN Security Council, that we have evidence that they have weapons of mass destruction, that was false. But and of course, in hindsight, if I had known that, but all the physical evidence and the people in a position to know were saying they've got the stuff. They've got weapons of mass destruction. These specially machined tubes that are consistent with and the voices against were not the people on the ground. They weren't when we talked to the weapons inspectors who were last on the ground in Iraq, they said, yeah, they've got yellow cake and all this other stuff, and you need to act. So
is that regret part of the reason why you're reticent to put troops on the ground to fight the Islamic State?
No. Well, I guess in this sense, yes, that in Iraq, the great failure was after training 938,000 Iraqis, spending hundreds of billions of dollars. We were spending $10 billion a month there for a long time. After all that, we handed off to Nouri al-Maliki, and when we handed that off, his interests were not the same as ours. He was acting for the Shia majority in Iraq against the Sunni minority. That was his priority. It wasn't our priority. So that was the core of our failure. Why Iraq is a mess today is right there. We gave them the opportunity, and there was a lack of interest, a lack of priority. Our interests were not the same. In Syria, we have that same weakness. There's no problem getting into Syria. No problem. We could get in there in a week. Getting out will take us 20 years. So the parallels are the same with respect to Iraq and Syria in that context. I would not vote for an authorization for use of military force in Iraq because I don't see a plan of getting out. I see a 20-year mess with no real assurance that we are going to leave the world in a better place after the expenditure of billions in treasure and countless thousands of lives of America's sons and daughters. And it's going to take some major work on our part and of the international community's part to come up with a solution there to stabilize Syria. And it's going to have to be, look, you don't export democracy through the Defense Department. You don't. We've tried that a couple of times now. You export it through through your commercial agreements, your trade agreements, humanitarian groups, and through a partnership, an international partnership that is able to embrace those populations in those regions in a positive way. And we need to change our strategy. So I don't want to do the same thing again and end up with the same result that we've had, and it looks like we might be having in Afghanistan.
Someone who says they have a policy on the Islamic State that critics say doesn't have quite as much nuance as you just outlined is Donald Trump. And I'm curious, polls have found a substantial number of people who are lunch bucket Democrats, working class white people, support Trump. What do you think is his appeal?
He's direct. He's honest. He is honest. You have to give him credit. He says it, and look, there's nothing more orchestrated than a presidential campaign. And so, you've got all these folks that are trying to do exactly what they're told to do, and they're incredibly scripted, and to the point that everybody knows they're terribly scripted. And then you've got this one guy out there who is unlike all the rest, and he's just putting it out there. And in that context, he seems so genuine. He seems so genuine and real, and much more colorful and animated than all these people who are sort of cookie cutter, saying the same things in some respects, but the way they present themselves. And he's running, you know, he's digital, and they're sort of analog. You know, he's operating on a different level. You know, he's in some, and even when he steps in it, you know, people give him credit for his honesty, and I think that I don't know, maybe it's this, maybe it's social media, that people are communicating on a different level now, and he has tuned his messaging in a way that is speaking right to people directly, and he's much more real than, you know, some of the candidates that he's competing against. So, and the other thing is, you know, he has struck a tone. You know, he's struck a nerve with, and I think that nerve is fear. He has gone for the, you know, most visceral fears that the American people have of you know, fear of their own security, fear of foreigners, fear of, you know, when he says, you know, about the Mexicans coming over the border, and, you know, all the things he said there, he's tapped into a fear that unfortunately a lot of that is harbored by a lot of Americans today.
You said some of the other candidates were cookie cutter. Are those just Republicans, or do you think Hillary Clinton, who you support, is also cookie cutter?
No. Hillary's the real deal. Yeah, well, of course. I'm with Hillary. I have been for a while. I saw her work as Secretary of State. And quick story, so I'm in Pakistan. And
I love stories that start like that.
yeah, so in Pakistan, and we're in with President Zarif and a couple of the senators from Pakistan. And so while we're there, one of our CIA agents is in, I think he's in Lahore. Yeah, he's in Lahore. So he's working at the embassy. So he's clandestine. And so he's not openly CIA, but he is. And so he stopped at a traffic light. And while he's at the traffic light, two armed men pull up on motorcycles and stop his car, get in front of his car, and pull their weapons out. So our guy, not sure what's going on, is this just a robbery, but he's obviously an American, is forced to respond, and shoots both of them through the window. But now he's stuck in Lahore in a major traffic jam. So we try to pull him out. So we send people from the embassy. Unfortunately, if you know Pakistan, they're famous for their traffic. So our guys can't get in, and they have to drive the wrong way on the expressway to get to him. And unfortunately, they kill a pedestrian on the way to rescue their guy. So the rescue fails. They've got to go back to the embassy. So now we've got one dead Pakistani pedestrian, and our guy's in custody of the Pakistani officials who are calling for his you know, they want to hang him. So Hillary Clinton went in there, and I thought, you know, so here I am in the meeting with the Pakistani leadership, and they asked me, is he CIA? And I said, he is not CIA. He is not. Because I didn't have that information. So I said, I promise you, he is not CIA, because we just got to get this guy out of there. And I thought, he's toast. He is toast. You know, the mullahs are all in an uprising. Well, Hillary Clinton went in there and very deftly and very courageously negotiated his release. There was some money that had to be paid to the family. We had to make reparations, but she got our guy out. And, you know, it hit the fan. And Pakistan is probably the toughest, believe me. That's a tough environment. I've spent some excruciating time in Pakistan with other members of Congress trying to work things out because they're a nuclear power and we need their cooperation if we're going to have success in Afghanistan. But I've seen her in action. I've seen her in action. And you know, if I'm in a foxhole, that's the person who I want. She's tough. She's smart. She's not going to be making it up as she goes along. And you know, I'm afraid that's, you know, if we get Trump, we are in trouble. I mean, honestly, you know, they asked him, you know, look at the interviews. You know, he's on an interview with, I think CNN. They asked him. They said, you know, where do you get your information? He said, I watch the shows. You know, I watch the TV shows, and nothing against the press, but
no offense taken. Yeah. So you were a strong backer of Hillary Clinton in 2008 as well.
Oh yeah.
Should she win and asks you, would you join her administration?
I don't think that would ever happen. I have a great job in the Congress. I love serving the people. I have a great district.
Are you running for re-election this year?
I am. Yeah. I already have an opponent. So you know, the race is on.
But if she asked you, would you consider joining?
I don't think she would ask me to.
But if she did, come on.
No.
You would?
I would do my job here.
Stay a congressman no matter
exactly,
what. Okay.
Exactly. So anyway, you know, going back to Trump, I mean, just listen to what he's saying. He had an interview with again, it was CNN, and they said, you know, what are you going to do with the southern border? He said, we're going to build a wall. He said, we're going to build a wall. It's going to be a nice wall. He said, I'm going to get, now this is actually a presidential candidate. He said, we're going to get the best architects and we're going to make the Mexicans pay for it. Then they said, what are you going to do about the 8 or 11 million people here? You're going to round them up? He says, yeah, we're going to have to round them up. But we're going to do it politely, he says. This is a presidential candidate talking about rounding up people.
And he's leading in the polls.
So, and you know, we don't want to let any Muslims come to this country at all. I mean, I'm in favor of vetting and you know, they do have a tactic, ISIL, of you know, putting militants in the stream of legitimate refugees. So we have to be extremely careful. I understand that, and I supported that. I voted for that because I think we need it. But
I want to turn to another
okay.
election.
All right.
Pro Hillary Clinton, anti-Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. There was before you were a congressman, you were a state senator, and in that state senate race, it was an open seat to replace former Senate President Billy Bolger, right?
Right.
To succeed him.
Right.
And you were running against
Bill Bolger Jr. Yeah.
Billy Bolger Jr.
Yeah.
And in that race, a union official named Marty Walsh was with Billy Bolger. I'm sure.
I remember that.
I'm sure you haven't. Sure you haven't forgotten.
I remember. I remind him all the time. So here's a good one. So I'm knocking doors in Savin Hill, right? So I'm from South Boston, but I was born in Dorchester, so I'm working Savin Hill really hard. It's a high turnout precinct. So middle of a snowstorm, and I mean, so I got Danny Ryan. I had Ray Sweeney. Okay, Ray Sweeney is one of 17 Sweeneys, one family, 17 kids. And so I got him with me. That's like a precinct. So he and I are knocking doors on Sydney Street in Savin Hill. So we're knocking doors, and through the snow, and it's coming down, and people are refusing to open up their doors because it's snowing. They're like, what are you doing? So we've got our pamphlets, you know, when we're going door to door. And it was a special election, so you had to do it. The election was like in March, and so the campaign was January, February. So we're out there, and I look across the street, and there's Marty Walsh and Sauce Callahan knocking doors for Billy Bulger. And I'm saying, I know these guys are picking up my literature because they're knocking the houses after me, you know. So we turn the corner, and there's a 3-decker, and I knock on the door. And a woman comes to the door, a little Irish brogue, you know. She says, "Oh, what are you doing, darling?" I said, "Oh, Steve Lynch." "Oh, come on in here, come on in." So Ray Sweeney, come on in here. So they all knew Ray. So I'm sitting there, and there's the lady of the house, and then like 3 of her sisters, and so we got cocoa going, we got coffee, and so we ended up, and we're thawing out there, you know, we're drying out our clothes, and so we're chatting them up, and all of a sudden the door opens, and it's Marty Walsh, and he looks at the woman and he says, "Ma, what are you doing?" It was Mary Walsh. And so she tells Marty after I'm gone, she goes, "You know, I'm voting for Lynch, right?" Yeah. Oh, it was funny. It was, you know, it's just one of those great things that happened. So in the next, you know, but then the next campaign, the first thing I did was go over and get Marty Walsh on my side for Congress. You know?
I want to talk about that next campaign.
Yeah.
It didn't come easily.
No.
In 2001, you had several opponents,
Yeah.
and looking through, I wasn't there, but looking through some of the literature from the time, it looks like some of your toughest days before election came at the hands of front-page stories in the Boston Globe.
Yeah, on the Globe.
In the Globe. Lynch defaulted on student loans,
Yeah, that was a
June
good one.
23rd. Lynch defaulted as holding sword, June 26th. Lynch vows to repay state loan, says he'll market rental property. Joyce takes lead in fight for fundraising. Lynch trails. It goes on and on,
Yeah.
and on and on and on. I'm curious, what's your relationship with the Boston Globe? Are you a subscriber?
I am a subscriber, and the delivery has been very poor.
Oh, I'm shocked to hear that.
I just want to register a complaint.
But you
First
haven't
time I
canceled
ever complained about not getting the Globe. Yeah. No. Actually, it's been fair, I think. You know, look. You know, it's my relationship with the Globe is this. They try to kill me, and I try to avoid getting killed. It's, you know, a lot of people in politics have that relationship with the media, and that's how it goes. So, you know, I think they favor very liberal candidates, and that is not me. That's not me, and I'm not going to. You know, that's a very important constituency in the Democratic Party. But I'm more of a centrist, so I will take my positions based on the bills and the issues as I see them. And they have every right in the world to criticize me for that, and I understand that, and I'm willing to live with that. In some parts of my district, that is helpful to me. It actually is. You know, I think...
In 2009, an article in the Globe, headline was, "All but one member of the Massachusetts congressional delegation has sent a letter to New York Times Chairman Arthur Sulzberger Jr. expressing concerns about the threatened shutdown of the Globe. The letter to Sulzberger on congressional letterhead was signed by Edward M. Kennedy, John F. Kerry, and every representative except Stephen Lynch."
Yeah. So what the Globe was asking me to do in that letter was to sit down and negotiate with the New York Times on behalf of the Boston Globe. Now, if I did that for another company, I would have been the subject of an investigation by the Spotlight team. But because I was doing it to the benefit of the Boston Globe, they thought it was okay. But I thought there was an ethical breach there, and so I refused to sign the letter.
You were talking about being a centrist. You said, "Calling me the least liberal member from Massachusetts is like calling me the slowest Kenyan in the Boston Marathon. It's all relative." One of the places where you diverged from your colleagues was on the Affordable Care Act. You voted against the main bill. You voted against it.
Right.
Do you feel vindicated by your vote against the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare?
Increasingly so.
In what way?
Well, to begin with, I voted for the House version of Obamacare, and there were 3 provisions in the House version that were not in the Senate version, which passed. And
But the main final bill, you voted
Oh,
against.
I voted against that.
It,
Yeah. That's the one that came up, well.
I know,
That's
reconciliation.
the final
and-
reconciliation, yeah, you know that. All right, so the three the three problems, huge problems I had with the final bill that passed. Well, let me talk about the one I voted for, and then it's the same.
Briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. Okay. So the Affordable Care Act taxes health benefits. It taxes health benefits. That's the first time in the in our country's history that we actually tax health benefits. We used to treat tax, the tax on health care like we do the tax on food. You don't tax food. People needed to live. So we departed from that. I didn't like that. We tax heavily union plans that are generous.
The so-called Cadillac plan.
Yeah, right. So although we just voted to delay that another 2 years till 2020, which I voted for, delaying it till 2020.
Have you ever voted for any of the bills to repeal it?
No, 62 times I have voted against, because they never offer an alternative. They're just let's get rid of that.
So you voted against it, but you haven't ever voted to repeal it because why?
Because they never offer an alternative. Yeah, and if they're serious, 62 times, when the president vetoes something 62 times, or it doesn't pass the Senate 62 times, it's not going to pass. It's just a messaging piece, and I don't want to message for the Republicans. So the other thing was it grants an antitrust exemption for insurance companies, so they don't have to compete. The only two industries in the country that have the ability to act in restraint of trade and have an exemption to the antitrust laws are Major League Baseball and healthcare, and that's why that's why baseball players. That's why it costs you a small fortune to go to the game. That's why the prices are so high in baseball, the salaries are so high, the ticket prices are so high, because there's no competition. Well, that's what the insurance company got in Obamacare. And then, what else? Let's see, antitrust, taxes. Oh, and we had a public option. We had a state-run public option in the House bill, which would allow the state to act as an insurance company in competition. So the state could have put out a bare bones plan to force the insurance companies to compete with that plan. It wouldn't have had all the bells and whistles, but it would have been a very low cost plan offered by the state, and it would have created competition, which you don't have now. That's why prices are going right.
In what way do you feel vindicated by your no vote?
Oh, prices are going to go up.
Prices have kept
Yeah, and also there are a bunch of provisions that people are now asking us to repeal that are part of Obamacare. Interesting, this Cadillac tax would have killed every single union plan out there. The unions that were mad at me for voting against Obamacare are now asking me to repeal. They've come back in. I don't think they really read through the bill and figured out how this was going to work.
I want to ask you on that issue. SEIU, a big union, took a knock at you very early on.
Oh, they ran a candidate against me.
Yeah. They were not pleased with you. That was unusual. You and organized labor are usually on the same page. Usually. And your critics see your biggest weakness as your staunch, they say, unyielding, unthinking support for unions. I'm curious, what are some other instances in which you've lined up against the organized labor position because you thought it would be best for your constituents?
Oh, there are a bunch. It's not unthinking support for the unions.
That's what your critics
say. I know. That's why they're my critics. Look, the Boston Building Trades, when I was a state rep and state senator, wanted to build an asphalt plant down by Andrews Square. Not a good idea, but there's jobs for them. So I opposed them. So that was our first. We had a big to-do over that. They were mad that I was opposed to that.
In Congress?
Oh, no, that was when I was state rep.
But I mean,
it's even more dangerous when you do it as a state rep and a state senator. Now I've got 727,514 constituents. Back then, all I had was the neighborhood of South Boston and a little part of Dorchester. And so labor could kill you at that level. You know what I mean? They could take you out. You don't have as much reach, as much insulation. What do they call it? The megaplex. They wanted to build Fenway Park, Gillette Stadium, a soccer stadium down in South Boston on the waterfront. It would have killed the port, because we would have had to close it on Sunday, which is the biggest day of the port for shipping. I opposed that, and we stopped Bob Kraft and others from building down that area. Labor was in lockstep. That was a huge project for them. They didn't lose the project, it just got moved to Foxborough. But yeah, I went up against them on that issue as well. The Affordable Care Act thing in Congress, again, that was a big issue for them. There were a few unions who that had actually read the bill that were doubtful, that were okay with me, but not many. I think it was Local 1505 at General Electric or Raytheon. They were building the extra engine for the F-15. We already had one engine. They wanted to build an extra one. And look, I'm all for union jobs. I'm all for responsible contracting and all that, but they were building something that we didn't need. So I would rather have our workers building stuff we need than building stuff we don't need. So I opposed that second engine, and Labor was mad at me on that. I'm sure if you give me some more time, I could think of others. But there are a bunch of
I wanted
times.
to put the criticism to
Yeah.
you. I wanted to ask you a sartorial question. When you were, well, two questions actually. Well, first was, I'm curious, when you were an iron worker, how did you see with hair like that?
Yeah. Well, you see, these are violations of the FAA. Those wings there. Yeah. That's a senior. Where'd you get that?
That's from high school, from your high school.
Okay. Very good.
And my other question for you is, when you went to BC Law, you were said to stand out because you wore white socks.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering whether you've upgraded your foot coverings to something
I have.
of a
I
darker
have.
hue.
Yeah,
you have over
yeah,
time.
yeah.
All right, one other question for you, and then we'll get a few audience questions. Is you may not know this, but you bear a very unique distinction. You're the only congressman in history who was both arrested for punching Iranians at a protest in 1979 and for smoking marijuana at a Willie Nelson concert in 1977. I'm curious, first tell me
Why do they call us happy hour again?
start
Only the Globe would call this happy hour.
start with the protest. What happened there?
Okay, so I'm meeting someone for lunch, and I'm walking
An old
across
girlfriend, right?
government. Actually, yes, walking across Government Center, and there is a big group of Iranians, students, protesting. The odd thing is they had taken our hostages in Tehran at the embassy. They had taken over, the Iranians had, and so they wouldn't let our people go. And so these protesters were standing out in front of the McCormick building in the apron there, saying, U.S. out of Iran. We were trying to get out, but they had us hostage. So at one point, as I'm walking across, one of the young fellows pulled out an American flag out of the backpack, and nothing good was going to happen at that point. So I went over and said, I need to have that flag. And then about 6 of them said, no, you don't. And so we get into it. And it wasn't much of a fight. It was really like a pile-up. But the police didn't see it that way. And so they came in and basically pulled me out and arrested about 6 or 7 of them and arrested me. And we went to court, and I explained that, well, they were saying I attacked them, and I said they attacked me. And the judges said, look, there's 6 of you, 1 of him. We're going to just rule in his favor, and we're going to ask everybody to go their own way. So get this. So a month ago, I'm sitting in Berlin. I'm on a panel on the Middle East with members of the Bundestag. So it's kind of like we're sitting up on a stage like this. And so the aspirants, they're all asking us questions. And one of the members from the Bundestag is actually an Iranian. His last name is Osman. So we answer the questions. And interestingly, there's members from all these German parties, but Osman and I are agreeing on most of the questions about the Middle East. And as we conclude, we take my mic off, I'm walking off. He comes up behind me and whispers, he says, you don't look big enough to beat up 6 Iranians. I swear to God. So the power of the internet, but you know.
All right. Now let me ask you about the Willie Nelson concert. Are you a big
Yeah. So we're in a big circle. Hopefully my daughter won't be watching this segment. we're in a big circle. There's probably 40 or 50 of us, and they're passing around a marijuana cigarette. And the idea, despite Bill Clinton's admonition, is actually you're supposed to inhale. And so it came around to me, and I handed off to the next person, and then the Chicago police arrived. They were basically doing details at the Illinois State Fair. So arrested all 40 of us, and it didn't go overnight, but my ironworker buddies came and bailed me out for a small amount of money and let us go. But that was basically it.
Reading about that, I was just in Colorado with some state senators exploring the marijuana industry. So I got you a little trinket there. It's it says fatty,
Wow.
and it's
That's cool.
pen. It's a pen for you to have from your Willie Nelson days.
We're gonna review that that trip to Colorado.
Okay,
And
I look forward to
If
it.
there's any bills for $400 worth of Doritos, we're gonna have to get to the bottom of that, Josh.
You'll
I'm
know.
sorry.
You'll know.
That is great. Look at that.
We'll get to a few audience questions, but first let's give him a big round of applause.
Oh,
Congressman Lynch.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh.
You have 1 more minute for audience
I
questions?
do, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sure.
All right. First audience question. A reader wrote to me about the GE announcement that they're moving their headquarters to Boston. I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful development. I give Mayor Walsh and Governor Baker great credit for that, because I know they were going back and forth, and there was some indecision on the part of GE for a while, but they actually decided to do so. They're going to be in my district, my congressional district. I think that'll be, they're an iconic company, and I know it's like $150 billion in revenue a year. They'll bring a great energy to the city. I think it's a wonderful development. Hopefully that's a sort of a signal out there that Boston is the place to be. They have a long and strong history of creating high-paying jobs here in the United States, and I'm very excited about welcoming them to the city of Boston, along with the mayor and the governor, and just creating some jobs and improving the quality of life. And they're a great corporate citizen as well, so it's a home run.
Senator Ed Markey immediately released a statement saying he was over the moon about this, thrilled. We haven't heard much from Senator Elizabeth Warren on this, and she, in her campaign in 2012, repeatedly whacked GE for what she says paying nothing in net federal income taxes. Does she have a point? Does that concern you too?
I'd have to look at that. I don't know. I know they're getting some.
You think they're a good corporate citizen?
I'm sorry?
You think they're a good corporate citizen, Jim?
Oh, yeah. Very good with charities, things like that. Look, I mean, I've had differences with them. They closed down one of the, in fairness, they closed down a facility in Avon in my district. Affected about 140 union workers and maybe 160 non-union. However, the way they did it was they offered a lot of those workers jobs at other facilities because they were doing a consolidation. At the same time, they were adding, thousands of jobs on their life sciences group. So I couldn't really accuse them of abandoning Massachusetts when they're actually having a net increase of. So look, in today's world, you got to try to work with companies. You got to help them grow. They have to respond to the markets, and you have to help them be more competitive. And I think that their heart is in the right place. So. The tax issue, they're going to have to pay their fair share in taxes, but I also think they are net contributors in terms of jobs and other, positive aspects.
Final question for you from the audience. You ran against then Representative, now Senator Ed Markey, for the special election to succeed John Kerry. You lost. The question is, would you ever consider running for higher office again?
I wouldn't rule it out. But I have a great job. I love my job. My district is like heaven in terms of the people I represent. I have great freedom. There's a certain level of trust there between myself and the people that I represent, and I feel like I'm a good fit for the cities and towns that I represent. And so it would be very hard for me to look elsewhere. But again, like I say, I wouldn't rule anything out. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the time. Let's give another round of applause to Boston's own Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Thank you, Josh.
We're just going to step off the stage this way.
Let me just thank everybody here who came tonight to this tremendous interview. Let's give one more round of applause for Congressman Lynch. We'll get good sport here tonight. Thank you very much. And thank you all to everybody who's watching this on bostonglobe.com. I want to ask everybody to pay attention to the Boston Globe and the Suffolk website to see announcements about upcoming political happy hours. I want to thank Josh Miller for, once again, a great interview. And for all of us at Suffolk University, thank you very much for coming. Have a great evening.